Is it all over in Nagorno-Karabakh? Separatists in that Armenian enclave agreeing to lay down their weapons on day 2 of what may be remembered as a tale in 3 acts. Azerbaijan's drone-powered win on the battlefield in 2020, the months-long blockade that's happened of the only land corridor into that enclave, and then Tuesday, that sudden offensive by Baku. We'll ask about the protests that have ensued in Armenia's capital against the government of the losing side, and about Russia, which failed in its peacekeeping role. What happens now to the enclave and to the civilians on both sides? It's a shock to see the potential end of a seemingly endless conflict. The first fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh erupted when rival neighbors were still part of the Soviet Union. Why is it coming to a head now? How do events taking place there reshape the balance of power in the Caucasus and beyond? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at those events unfolding in Nagorno-Karabakh. Joining us from Yerevan is correspondent Régis Janté. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
From Baku, Javid Aga, reporter for Intelli News. Welcome to the show.
Hello there.
From Aix-en-Provence in the south of France, Taline Papazian, senior lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Welcome.
Hello.
And with us is former French ambassador to Russia, Jean de Glignasti. Thanks for joining us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on the hashtag F24debate. Azerbaijan's president's been speaking in the last hour, saying that full sovereignty has been restored over Nagorno-Karabakh. There were nearly 100 killed on Tuesday, strategic installations overrun, and Armenian separatists raising the white flag of surrender ahead of formal talks that are due to take place on Thursday over the status of Nagorno-Karabakh and its estimated 120,000 ethnic Armenians. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Explosions were still reverberating around the city early on Wednesday, the second day of Azerbaijan's so-called anti-terrorist operation against Nagorno-Karabakh.
I was lucky to survive. If you could see what was happening here, everything was covered in smoke.
But then came news of the ceasefire, which had been agreed by both sides. In a statement, ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh said that with the mediation of the Russian peacekeeping contingent, an agreement was reached on the complete cessation of hostilities from 1 p.m. on September 20th. They also said they'd accepted a proposal for talks the following day on the Azerbaijani demand to integrate the breakaway region. They said they had no choice but to do so, because the world had stood by while Azerbaijan had broken through their lines. Azerbaijan, which accuses Armenia of having forces in Nagorno-Karabakh, also confirmed the agreement.
The units of the Armenian armed forces located in the Karabakh region of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the illegal Armenian armed groups will lay down their weapons and leave their combat positions.
Russia says its peacekeepers, who have been evacuating residents from Karabakh, will help implement the ceasefire. Local officials say dozens of people have been killed in Azerbaijan's operation, which began on Tuesday after blaming separatists in the region for killing some of its troops. The escalation had raised concerns that a full-scale war could resume between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the region, which is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but largely populated by ethnic Armenians. The Armenian Prime Minister again denied that Armenia had troops in the enclave and said that Armenia had no hand in drafting the ceasefire agreement, which would appear to pave the way for Azerbaijan to take full control of Nagorno-Karabakh after more than 3 decades of struggle over the mountainous territory.
And Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev saying that the separatists were withdrawing from Nagorno-Karabakh. Most of their hardware had been destroyed. Régis Janté, we're also hearing that the ceasefire is holding. Can we call it a surrender?
this is too early to say to use that word, but indeed it seems that the ceasefire is holding tonight, and every parts of the conflict are speaking so. So I guess this is what's indeed going on. So positive in this way, but this ceasefire was probably drafted in Baku. When you look at the wording of it, it obviously comes from Baku, and that's not a surprise because Baku was in a position to really impose its conditions. So this is what's going on probably now, and the talks will resume. The conditions, the absolute condition, the principle for Baku in this regard is to make sure now that all what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is, let's say, under the principle of the sovereignty of Azerbaijan on that territory. It was true, for example, these last days, they were blocking the humanitarian aid coming from Armenian side, saying, it's an international border, they have to pay some customs and so on. And this is also what's happened, of course, the weaponry. It's a question about, of course, security because it's weapons, but it's also a question of principle to say on our sovereign territory, no one can have an army group, for example, without the agreement of Baku.
And Regis, we're seeing reports that for the second night, there are protests where you are in the Armenian capital.
Yeah, I don't know. I was not in the crowd lately, so I don't know how important it is. These demonstrations should be also looked with quite cautiously because this is coming from the opposition. It doesn't mean this is reflecting the mood of the whole population. We saw this demonstration since 3 years basically, and it never worked. And it was often very supported by the opposition, which didn't manage to capitalize on the defeat, for example, during the 2020 war. And this is also what they try to do now. So it's not that important. It was yesterday, for example, it was not thousands of people. It was few hundreds, indeed quite nervous. And part of the population is certainly unhappy with what's going on with Karabakh at the moment. But we should look at cautiously at these demonstrations.
Javid Aga, did you see this coming after there was first, again, that 9-month blockade of the Lachin corridor, which links Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, and now on Tuesday, this lightning offensive. Did you see all this coming?
To be honest, everyone saw that coming and everyone was expected. And even before this whole blockade thing started, there were expectations, you remember those eco-protests and their protests in the Lachin corridor. There were expectations that it was that time that this operation would start. But it came again in September. Just like a year before, there was Operation Revenge. And again, in this September, everyone started to hear rumors that their friends have been recalled to army and stuff like that. And now we knew that it was only a matter of days. And we saw that one coming, and nobody expected it to be long, but it was also shorter than expected, just 24 hours.
We heard President Aliyev again talking up that there's going to be an agreement. It's going to become, quote, a paradise in Nagorno-Karabakh. We also hear Russian peacekeepers say they've already evacuated 3,500 civilians. It's a question of whether or not the ethnic Armenians stay or go inside of Nagorno-Karabakh. Do the people of Azerbaijan feel magnanimous towards ethnic Armenians, or are they going to push them out?
It depends on the talks tomorrow, which is going to be held in Yevlakh. And so far as no Armenians have been moved to Armenia proper, and by the word evacuation, it actually means that they have been moved to Russian headquarters in the airport. So they are still in Karabakh, but it is unknown what will their leadership will talk about in Azerbaijan, what will Aliyev demands, if there's going to be more demands, if they are going to accept to live as citizens of Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijan's position is that if they want to leave, Lachin corridor is open. They are welcome to leave if they don't want to be citizens. So this is the conundrum we are facing, and therefore eagerly waiting for talks tomorrow. It probably will take months.
Probably will take months. Taline Papazian, what are you hearing from Nagorno-Karabakh and from Armenia?
Well, of course, I'm hearing shock and despair because even though all these developments were expected and were anticipated, as Régis said, as also my colleague Javid said, still the population is in shock, and the next question for them is whether there is going to be an evacuation of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians from the enclave of NK to Armenia mainland proper. So that's the question for tomorrow and the day after. And also Armenians are very wary that this is only a first step and that things may not end with Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenians are worried that the Azerbaijani leadership has other sorts of pretensions and
such as what?
Such as territorial pretensions over the territory of Armenia, and unfortunately, it is hard sometimes to differentiate between what is used for rhetoric purposes by the highest echelons of Azerbaijan's leadership, and including up to a number of times direct expressions of territorial pretenses by Ilham Aliyev, president of Azerbaijan, on Armenia's territory proper. So it's difficult to make the distinction between what you say for internal purposes and what you say because you really have objectives behind those statements, but those statements do exist. So Armenians are wary of the possibility of other attacks on Armenia's territory proper.
Again, it's a conflict that predates the fall of the Soviet Union. War in the early 90s claimed 30,000 lives and displaced many more. Jean de Glignesti, why did it come to a head now?
Well, the question is why it didn't happen before. Because everything was written down, if I can say so. In fact, it was not written down because the status of Nagorno-Karabakh was not addressed in the agreement of November 2020. So it was sort of gray zone. You had a peace agreement, you had the keeping force, the peacekeeping force, the Russian peacekeeping force, but nothing was said about the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. So it was, the inevitable follow-up of the loss of the war in 2020 and the agreement of November. So now Azerbaijan is feeling entitled to take back its territory.
And again, you've had these last 9 months where there's been this blockade taking place, various pretexts of the Lachin corridor that links Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh. What happened in terms of during that time? Could the international community have done more?
I think it's difficult. The cards are in Russian hands, and perhaps the Turks also. But the Western countries are doing some saber rattling, but they are not in a position to help militarily the Armenians. They are not in a position, even the convoy with a humanitarian aid couldn't pass through the blockade. So I think the peace is not in our hands. I'm sorry to say that.
All right, you mentioned the Russians back in 2020. It was Moscow that brokered the truce and sent peacekeepers, but not to defend the status quo, it seems. Instead, this Wednesday, the Kremlin pointing to the agreements that Jean de Glignesti was mentioning and saying that Armenia signed And so for them, that means recognition of our Azerbaijan's sovereignty over Karabakh. That's what the Kremlin spokesperson said. Oliver Farry has more.
Armenian women and children are evacuated by Russian troops. Images of peacekeepers that have been issued by the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. The aim to show the Kremlin is present in Nagorno-Karabakh and that it has not announced its role of mediator and guarantor of security, as Armenian authorities have accused it of doing.
We do not accept such accusations, especially after the official decision of the Armenian side to recognise Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan.
Historically an ally of Armenia, Russia was the instigator of the peace accord signed in November 2020. But the war in Ukraine has forced Moscow to revise its priorities. In recent weeks, Armenia has distanced itself from Russia. Yerevan has also raised the possibility of joint military exercises with the United States. Speaking on Wednesday as he met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Vladimir Putin was decidedly non-committal.
We are in very close contact with all parties to the conflict and with the authorities of Yerevan, Stepanakert and Baku. I hope we can achieve de-escalation and solve the issue in a peaceful way.
The latest Azerbaijani offensive, which Moscow says it only found out about at a few minutes' notice, could provide an opportunity to regain influence in Armenia.
This breakdown in Armenia-Russian relations is a factor here. I think it encourages Azerbaijan to be bolder, and it makes the Russians more ambiguous. And, it's quite possible, indeed, that the Russians want to use a crisis to sort of instigate regime change in Armenia, but whether they will succeed, it's a bit hard to say.
Nonetheless, Russia would appear to be the only country capable of preventing Azerbaijan from finishing off the self-proclaimed state of Nagorno-Karabakh. The ceasefire proposed by Moscow and adopted Wednesday by both sides shows it has not completely relinquished its involvement.
Taline Papazian, is Russia guilty of meddling or is Russia guilty of indifference?
Indeed, the million-dollar question. Well, Russia is guilty of both, actually. Well, let's start with the peacekeepers' mandate, okay? Because there is a lot of wrong information going on about that. Why did Russia decide to go to Karabakh in November 2020? Three things were not only advocated by Russia, but explicitly told by Vladimir Putin to the Duma when they voted for, sending the peacekeepers to Nagorno-Karabakh. These three things were respect of the ceasefire of November 10, 2020, protection of civilian population of Nagorno-Karabakh from mass death, quote unquote, and protection of civilian properties from massive damage. So these three obligations have not been fulfilled, and they have not been fulfilled not only since yesterday, but already on a number of occasions, if not almost continuously, with the effective blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh since December 2022. The other level where Russia is present, but this time is guilty of meddling in the wrong sense of the word, is because Russia is behind the scenes in Armenia. Whereas the attack is by Azerbaijan on Nagorno-Karabakh, the target of Russia is Armenia. And it's the sovereignty and independence of Armenia that is being threatened with the mounting crisis for months and months between Armenia and Russia, not as yet blowing up into a real open crisis, but it's a very rampant crisis. And it's a form of hybrid warfare.
Did Nicole Pashinyan make a mistake by reaching out to the United States, reaching out to the European Union to act as mediators?
No, I don't think he did, because the Russian formula and the Russian interests are not to solve the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, because the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is key to maintaining a Russian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh and more generally in the South Caucasus. And the second reason is that it's not in Russia's interest to settle relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, neither to settle relations between Armenia and Turkey. And this whole conflict here solution of NK conflict, resolution of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, resolution of Armenia-Turkey relations are, well, the key to unblocking and to pacifying the whole region. And that's not in Russia's interest at all, for reasons related to Russia's presence in the region.
Régis Chanté, at the outset, you mentioned demonstrations where you are in Yerevan at this hour, cautioning that there are demonstrations by the opposition. It's funny, can you just explain for our viewers, Nikol Pashinyan, on his watch, Armenia loses a war in 2020, and yet when he holds snap elections the following year, he gets re-elected handily. Where does he stand today?
When he was re-elected during these snap elections, he lost a lot of support from the people. But it doesn't mean that his opposition got these voices. And finally, if his party got like more than 3 points more than the first opposition party. But during, let's say, before and after the war, probably Pashinyan lost almost half of his support. So it was quite important. So I think he's quite lost at the moment because of this loss of support, which also now is increasing, partly because of some of his failures during his general policy, economical policy, for example, but partly also because of what's going on. Because now we see that with the Karabakh issue, and as we see it since 2 days now, we see that we are coming to the very crucial moment, the decisive moment, probably where indeed there will be no other choice than to say and to not only to say, but to formally show that Nagorno-Karabakh is belonging to Azerbaijan. He is the one who is in charge to announce this to the people and eventually to sign the documents. And he said it. He had still some support from the population. Of course, if you would ask to the people within a referendum in Armenia, they would say, no, we want to keep Karabakh. But also we understood that probably there were some more important questions. And Pashinyan, so for sometimes managed to give what the Armenian people wanted, which was not about Karabakh, or not firstly about Karabakh. It was about economy. The life is extremely difficult. It was about poverty. It was about corruption. But it's more and more difficult to deliver. The situation makes also the life of the people more difficult.
Jean de Glignesti,
of course, weakening. Plus, indeed, a very strong, is a very strong animosity from the Russians towards Pashinyan. It doesn't explain everything, but it is also part of the whole picture.
All right, personal enmity between Nikol Pashinyan and the Russian president. The European Union, it's tried to mediate. It's put out statements expressing its concern over what's going on. It's also bought a lot of natural gas from Azerbaijan since the start of the war in Ukraine as a way to try to multiply its sources of purchases. Has the EU unwittingly helped Aliyev?
Well, there's a lot of hypocrisy because everybody put a stake on Azerbaijan to bypass the gas tube and oil tube from Russia. So EU needs Azerbaijan. Second, the EU can be useful, and the US can be useful, and the Russian can be useful, and the Turks can be useful in ensuring that the to-be status of Nagorno-Karabakh should be more protective of its population. So we have a role to play.
It's not over yet, is what you're saying.
It's not over. The main question is formally in the hands of Baku. But there will be some international pressure to prevent Baku from having too tough a status for the Nagorno-Karabakh. And expelling the population, of course.
And you said earlier that Russia's the only one who could perhaps weigh in on this.
Russia is the only one to mediate for the status. Nobody denied that the status is in the hand of Baku. But now we can exert some kind of political soft pressure, because we should be sure that nobody will exert military or sanctions or whatever against Baku. But we can exert some diplomatic pressure to have a more or less satisfactory status for the Armenian population of the Nagorno-Karabakh.
All right, on Tuesday, while the fighting was raging, Azerbaijan's biggest backer was airing its support from the rostrum of the annual opening of the United Nations General Assembly in New York.
We support the steps taken by Azerbaijan, where we act with the motto of one state, two nations to protect its territorial integrity.
Javid Aga, at the end of the day, is it the drones that Turkey supplied to Azerbaijan, which proved decisive in the war of 2020, that made the difference? Or is it, as we were talking about a moment ago, the fact that Azerbaijan is in demand because of its natural resources?
I believe that the belief about gas or other natural resources, and that's why Azerbaijan has an upper hand. It's a rather inflated view, because Azerbaijan's gas resources cannot be an alternative to Russia. But with or without these resources, Azerbaijan already had an upper hand, and they already calculated these, which heights to capture, which towns to move into, and it was a plan that was already in motion. So there was literally no way to stop this. And I would rather say that drones are always helpful, and in this case, they were used massively, and not so much as the last war, but in comparison to Armenia, which never conformed it to this modern weaponry, Azerbaijan certainly had an upper hand, but not because only of the drones, but there was a decisiveness, and they had no fear of, like Aliyev himself today said that they have no fear of any pressures or ultimatums, and they would do just whatever they want. And they already had an upper hand, and Armenians had 3 years to prepare for this, and it was already solved by the morning. So I think that view about resources of Azerbaijan is rather inflated.
And Talin Papazian was saying earlier, Javid, about how there are fears in Armenia that President Aliyev's ambitions, territorial ambitions, won't stop at Nagorno-Karabakh. Are those fears founded?
Well, nobody can say that for sure. What goes on his head, but as far as I've seen on the media, there's a Western Azerbaijan community that has been set up, and it calls for Armenia to let Azerbaijanis back in, which was deported back in the Soviet times, 60s or 80s at the last. And this has been mostly seen as an territorial ambitions of Aliyev, because it has a state support now. It was just an NGO back in the day before the war. And I guess this is what mostly caused the Armenian leadership and the people to see this as territorial claims. But currently, after all these loss of money, they bought lots of weapons from Israel, and there has been severe depletion of arsenal of Azerbaijan after the war. So I think that they have to focus on solving Karabakh first, rather than spending all their military and might on some adventurous war. At least this would be what a smart man would do. And I don't think that Aliyev is stupid. So I think that for now, they are going to focus on Karabakh and solve this problem, because I think that it is going to take months. And in that ceasefire agreement, there was nothing about the institutions of Armenians already having Karabakh, that's these political units. So I think this would be a focus in these talks. So Is there a status coming? I don't know, because Aliyev today said that there is absolutely no political status that could be expected. But I think that there could be some judicial reforms, administrative reforms on the administrative units of Azerbaijan, because recently, just like last year, Azerbaijan started to refer to Karabakh as an economic zone, economic region, rather than regions, districts. So I think that there's an administrative reform is upcoming. So we may have some new legislation about it.
Yeah, and there's, again, that anguish and concern that is being expressed by Armenians, 120,000 residents in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's at the heart of those talks that are scheduled for Thursday. Armenia's deputy foreign minister calls unfolding events, quote, the final act of the attempt by Azerbaijan to ethnically cleanse the region.
We've seen the statements of Azerbaijan about the so-called humanitarian corridors, which cannot be described otherwise as the invitation for the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh to start exodus of the region.
Régis Janté, when you take the long arc of history, the term ethnic cleansing is bandied around a lot. How much ethnic cleansing have we seen? How much could we see?
Some cuts. You know, on this topic, indeed, Aliyev tries to depict himself often as someone who is the president of a country where there are many ethnic minorities. That's true, but at the same time, he gave a lot of very bad signals to the Armenians that if they would become citizens of Azerbaijan, it will turn badly for them. For example, right after the war, he created a kind of park or museum in Baku exhibiting the trophy of the war to 2020, and what was exhibited was really very racist and very humiliating for the Armenians. It was the worst signal you could send to Armenians. And of course, everyone saw that on the social networks and on the medias. Same when they say, you know, everyone can become, is welcome to become a citizen, but the ones, especially the men who were fighting against us. And it's almost every family from Karabakh who at some point had some men who were fighting, so they would not stay. So sometimes there's the feeling among the experts in Armenia, for example, or the foreign experts which are looking at the region, and which think that maybe Aliyev wants to keep not 120,000 Armenians, but maybe 30,000 or 50,000, just to say that the country is very tolerant towards its minorities, but in reality it would be a very weakened minority.
Taline Papazian, what's your prediction on that score?
On the score of ethnic cleansing, I don't want to venture upon making a prediction because that is very serious. But if we judge from what we have been seeing for the past 9 months, well, maintaining a blockade, not letting medical access, medical supplies, food as a weapon, all these are not good signs in terms of ethnic cleansing. So Armenians have reasons to be worried. And if I can add something to what David said earlier, I want to say that, well, Armenians, when it comes to territorial pretenses of Azerbaijan, have very tangible reasons to suspect that it could go very wrong, because since May 2021, Azerbaijani armed forces are indeed present, stationed on the territory of Armenia proper, because they have advanced a number of times on that territory. And the attacks just a year ago, after which, as a result, Azerbaijani armed forces have conquered 150 square kilometers of Armenian territory. Those are facts. So, you know, we hope for an agreement at some point that will settle all these issues. But, well, as Javid said, in the best case scenarios, those sorts of agreements will take months, and I doubt that we have so much time ahead of us.
And I get back to this question of who can pressure both sides to maybe look at the future in a more clear-headed fashion, in a more appeased manner, if you have, as we heard that little clip of Recep Tayyip Erdogan earlier, squarely behind Ilham Aliyev, if you have the Russians taking their distance from Armenia, whose job is this?
It's a real conundrum, and it's the quadrangle of the circle. Because on one hand, a resolution of the conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh and of relations of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, Turkey, as I said earlier, can only take place in the region, in the South Caucasus, and it has to, on a variety of levels, involve the various actors of that region, and by some sort of miracle, make them engage in cooperation rather than in conflict and use of violence. On the other hand, we know for sure that, especially given the diplomatic and conflict and use of conflict traditions of some states in that region, Turkey, Russia, sometimes Iran, it will be impossible to achieve if there is not an overarching guarantee from the outside world. I don't know if that can be the United States. I don't know if that can be Europe. I don't know if there is another state that could act as a guarantor, but we have to think all those tracks simultaneously and in parallel to have prospects for the future of that region, which at the moment are difficult to imagine even.
An outcome, Jean de Glignesti, of a long-running conflict, it either happens through peace or one side decidedly defeating the other. We think of, for instance, Sri Lanka, where the Tamil rebellion was crushed. In this particular case, we have a winner and a loser, it seems, at this point in time. I mean, I don't want to be too premature in all of this because it's early days. How does that upset the balance, the bigger balance of power in the wider Caucasus?
Well, I'm not sure because I think the Russians will remain the arbiter.
Because I heard a lot of reports this morning on the radio saying, well, Russia's only focused on Ukraine right now. They're not paying attention.
Well, they are weakened in the Caucasus, of course, but they still have many cards in their hands. The Turks also will have a role to play. I think the answer to your question is, in fact, the real status of Nagorno-Karabakh. If it's satisfactory for its citizens, more or less, and as it has just been said, we need some kind of overarching guarantee without without too much meddling with the Azerbaijani government, because they are very touchy about that. But we can help by diplomacy, by all that, to find a satisfactory status for the remaining Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. If it's the case, everybody could be happy and it will be a real peace. If it's not the case, it will be a never-ending war.
Javid Aga, I guess it's the wrong day to ask Azerbaijan's president, Baku, making it clear that they don't need the United Nations at this point. So this overarching sort of framework for the future, is there any outside player who can broker it?
That's $1 million question. And as Taline explained, it's very hard to see at this point that any outside force can intervene either diplomatically or any other ways. And Azerbaijan sure has an upper hand at this point too, because they have been lobbying and using their connections throughout the world. And it's very hard to say at this point who will solve this question, but it appears that so far Aliyev has decided to have this political will to see this through, and it is now up to results of preliminary talks tomorrow, and after that we can be much more sure.
All right, one final word from you, Régis Janté. Separatists in Nagorno-Karabakh saying over 10,000 have been evacuated from Armenian communities. That's unconfirmed at this point. Does that seem plausible?
Probably we speak about the people who left some villages, especially on the contact line. This is what happened. I think like six villages have been totally evacuated yesterday, and indeed they found their shell in the Russian bases, I think, and that they
seem to be losing the connection there.
It's really
Régis, we're having
Skype
issues with Yerevan. We'll try to have those fixed for upcoming editions. I want to thank you so much for joining us from the Armenian capital. I want to thank Javid Aga for being with us from Baku, Taline Papazian in Aix-en-Provence, Ambassador de Grigny-Esti. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.